Hey, what are you watching?
It's the Gamebreaker TV pre-show for Blizzcon. Hey, Olivia's giving out prizes.
Turn it off.
What? Hello, and welcome back to the Thriftington Post. My name is Lantis, and in today's episode I'd like to talk about BlizzCon from 2013. There was a lot more stuff this year than just World of Warcraft, so I would like to go through everything else before I get to WoW. But I mean, Blizzard's up to 5 games now, plus they have a movie coming out. So, I figured I might as well talk about everything else since this isn't just a World of Warcraft show. So, let's see. Diablo 3, we have a new class, new expansion coming out, something like that. StarCraft. There's I don't think they mentioned anything from Legacy of the Void, but I wasn't really paying attention. Then there's that other game and that other game, and the movie which is supposed to star, who was it? Duratan and some guy. Anyway, alright, World of Warcraft news. So, first of all, the new expansion is called Warlords of Draenor, and it's about some really cool people from the early Warcraft games that, if you actually played the early Warcraft games, you probably wouldn't recognize any of them. Most of them come from the Warcraft novels. Most of those novels were written between 2 and 3 to sort of fill in the gaps. I mean, Doomhammer, we know that he went up to, what was it, Blackrock Mountain to stop Blackhand. And then in World of Warcraft, we sort of fill out a lot of that story. But in the actual games themselves, you get like a paragraph which talks about stuff that makes no sense to you if all you've played is World of Warcraft. It makes no sense to you even if you go back and play those games. Like in the first Warcraft game, the orcs came from a portal from hell. Like, that was what they were. They were demons from hell invading this medieval planet, and the humans from the Alliance were trying to fight them off. So then we get to Warcraft 2, and we really don't get that much more story. And in fact, we don't get any story really until the expansion Through the Dark Portal. Then we get like 5 named characters on the Alliance, 5 named characters on the Horde, and most of those characters are people that are either lost if they're on the Alliance side, or standing next to Adal Shatrath, or if it's on the Horde side, they've been raid bosses. It's Deathwing and Cho'Gall and miscellaneous. Oh, Grom. No, not Grom. Grom? Yes, Grom Hellscream, and he's dead now. There's a monument to him. He died in a cinematic in Warcraft 3, and plus miscellaneous. So this really isn't a story that's ever been fleshed out before, except through the novels and very briefly in World of Warcraft. In the Burning Crusade, a lot of the warlords of Draenor were dungeon bosses, like the Shattered Hand guy, or... So... Oh, well, you might be familiar with Gul'dan's Skull. In fact, odds are you're more familiar with Gul'dan's Skull than you are with Gul'dan, because whenever you think of Illidan, you think of a guy reenacting Hamlet. Well, the skull that he's holding is Gul'dan's, and that's about all we know of him, unless you play a Warlock and you've done, I think the Green Fire quest mentions him. I don't remember anymore. It talked a lot about a lot of demonic things, but anyway, the point being is that we really don't know that much about these orcs, and now they're going to be front and center of the next expansion. But let's see. They did say at one point that Grom? Is it Gron? I really want to say Grom. Yeah, because Garrosh is his son, so his name is Grom. Grom, they said that he's going to be the last boss. They also said an orc is not going to be the last boss. So given the context in which they said he would be the last boss, I think it was a joke. I mean, they did say it was him riding Wrathion, so that whole thing could have been a joke. Part of it could have been a joke. Grom might actually end up being the final boss of this expansion. But for now, I'm just going to say we don't know. Them saying it's him is probably a joke. We'll find out as the story unfolds. Now, the plot of it is Garrosh goes back in time to Draenor right before the orcs drink the blood of Manaroth and become the evil horde that we know them from in the first Warcraft game. But apparently, even back then, there was still a very savage, brutal race that liked to kill stuff and maim things, even though one of the main things we hear about them is that they were a shamanistic people. They lived off the land, but I mean, Native Americans were shamanistic. They lived off the land, and they also engaged in war, so I'm guessing orcs are no different than that. They can still be a very savage, brutal people, and we'll see them doing just that because Garrosh will have had several years to sort of prepare them to turn them into the Iron Horde to reinvade Azeroth, and we're going back through the portal to stop him. Now, this is supposed to be a parallel universe that Garrosh is altering, so nothing he does actually affects our present, so there's no continuity issues. They've already said they don't want to have to deal with any of that, so they're not. And also, they're not going to be dealing with the time travel aspects of it, so it's not going to be there's not going to be a scene of Thrall telling his dad, "You're my dad, you die, I never got to meet you, let's go play catch." There's not going to be anything like that, according to what they've said. But we'll see how all that actually plays out over the patches once it's released. Now, besides that story, we've also got a bunch of changes to how the game works. The first thing I'd like to mention is, what's it called? Mythic rating, which is what we know of today as heroic rating will be mythic rating. It's not going to be 10 and 25, it's going to be a 20-player raid. So you're going to have 20 people, or you're not going to do heroics in Warlords of Draenor. Now, my first thought to this is actually going to be kind of funny, because, yeah, when mythic rating comes out, it's going to kill the 10 versus 25 argument. But until then, it's actually going to make the argument much worse, because 20 is closer to 25 than it is to 10. So everyone that raids 25 man is going to say, see, Blizzard agrees with us. 10 man isn't real raiding. And that's going to start so many arguments, and that will be amusing to watch play out. What else? Oh, right. As far as everything else is going to be 10 to 25 flexible. So flex rating and normal mode rating is going to become normal mode and heroic. So I'm not going to be able to talk about flex rating anymore. It'll just be those two difficulties. And as far as I know, the new normal mode and the heroic mode, which heroic mode is normal mode now, that will be heroic then. So that's actually kind of what they did to dungeons. Like, heroic dungeons used to be a thing where a dungeon had a much harder version of its normal self. But then they decided to say, no, heroic dungeons are just max level dungeons, and that's all heroic rating's going to be also pretty soon, is just the original normal mode of rating. But at the same time that they're doing that, they're also bringing back the concept of heroic dungeons. Interestingly enough, they did say it very briefly that they're going to have max level versions of all these dungeons on normal mode, and then heroic above that, to create a two-tiered progression right there before you get into raids. Speaking of, there is going to be a half-tier raid before we get into the full tier. Oh geez, what is this one? 17 or tier 1 Wrath or Warlords of WAD. Okay, so before we get to tier 1 WAD, we're going to have like a little half tier, which they said the point of that was just to give people a chance to raid while they're waiting for the real raid to begin, and Blizzard wants to delay the real raid because they don't see most of the world as being at max level in time for that. So again, you're only going to need 10 people to do any of the difficulties from normal to heroic, and then it can scale all the way up to 25. And then if you want to actually be a hardcore raider, you have to be in a group of 20. And that will be mythic rating. And what else? LFR staying in the game untouched, I think. I actually think they're going to make it even easier, because they said they wanted it to be something like a narrative difficulty, where you're just sort of cruising through, which I think is for the best. I mean, a lot of people say we don't want to dumb down the content. We want to encourage these people to be better players, but they're not going to do it in LFR no matter what. If you make it very difficult, then they're not going to be able to really get... It's hard to say, but I just see making these things hard is just going to end up being frustrating to people that know what they're doing in LFR, because the harder it is, the harder the 10 or 15 people that know what they're doing have to carry everyone else. And it's usually closer to the 10 people or 8 people that know what they're doing. Just go right now, queue up for Darumu on LFR. That number of people alive at the end of that encounter are the number of people that know what they're doing. Run them like 100 times. Take the, you can do like you can take a simple random sample of the number of people alive at the end of Darumu, and then from that create a standard deviation and all that, and just get some real statistical data for how many people are carrying how many people. That, I don't know where I'm going with all that. My point being is that the harder you make it, the harder people that know what they're doing have to carry. I believe that very rarely will people who are being carried actually become so good that they're one of the carriers instead of the carriees just through that type of interface. They would really have to step up to a mode of rating where the people that they're rating with will give them construction feedback on how they're playing, and since they're doing it around other people that they're around all the time because they're in a guild, they'll actually feel compelled to go and read about their class, learn what they're doing, because it's not that they even want to try and impress other people. They just don't want to embarrass themselves in front of other people. So they'll try to have some semblance of an idea of what they're doing when they get in there. And if they don't, it'll be brought up quickly enough, and that's when they can start improving. You get better at real rating by doing real rating. You don't get better at it by doing LFR. So it's, I believe, a lot better to just make LFR as painless as possible for everyone and just keep it very, very easy. Oh, and the other thing is there's this perception right now that tanks aren't wanting to deal with LFR because the environment is just hostile enough to them that they would just rather go into flex rating and do that if they have to do anything that's short of normal mode rating. So making LFR as easy as possible means there'll be very few mess ups from anyone, because it becomes very hard to mess up at that point. And then it's much easier for someone who's a tank not to get blamed for something, whether or not it's their fault. If something bad happens, the tanks get blamed. If nothing bad can possibly happen, no tanks get blamed. It becomes a less stressful environment. More people queue up as tanks. Everyone gets quicker queues. So that could be how Blizzard is dealing with that situation. If Flex really is what's taking tanks out of LFR, that it's never really been said that that's definitely what's going on, but that is a perception of that. Now, another thing is the removal of useless stats. I'm not sure how I feel about that. They're taking that out. They are taking out hit and expertise, and that means you don't have to reforge your gear around to get just the right amount of hit, just the right amount of expertise. And also, in addition to that, they're taking reforging out of the game, which is, I also don't know how I feel about that. I mean, reforging seemed like a really good idea when it was first put into the game, but when it was first put into the game, that was, well, we first heard about it during Wrath, and then we had the pre-Kata update in which armor pin and all that was removed. But when I first heard about it, it was still in the Wrath environment before it was actually put into the game. And I really liked the idea of that because I liked having as much armor pin as possible. So I thought, oh, I can just stack the crap out of that. Plus, there were a lot more stats back then. Like I was thinking, oh, if I wanted to get into tanking, I could reforge a lot of stuff into defense. And then, it came into the game at the same time that stats got simplified. And so really all you were ever doing with it is get hit cap, get expertise cap, get rid of any extra hit or expertise if you have too much of it, and then stack your stats in their priority. If your best stats are mastery, crit, haste, then that's how you would order them. It's a very low bar to entry. I mean, you can Google, stat weights for your spec here, for the patch you're on. Anyone could do that very quickly. Or actually, now there's like one-click interfaces called like Reforge Lite. You hit one button and it reforges your gear for you. You never have to think about it. That's for people that are too lazy to go to Ask Mr. Robot, who will also do the same thing, but he lines up what you need to do, so you do that instead of having a machine do it for you. So there's all these different options. It's, like I was trying to say, it's a low bar for entry to being able to look like you know what you're doing. And even then, a lot of people can't pull it off. So there definitely is something to be said for it dumbing down the game, for them to remove hit expertise and then get rid of reforging. But I don't know, at the same time, the reason for them doing it isn't to dumb down the game. Actually, there's a couple reasons, but one of the main things is that they felt like there's just too much you have to do to your gear whenever you get it these days. Like, back in the day, you could basically get a piece of gear and throw it on. Like, during vanilla, there was enchanting, and that was it. And I don't know, just nowadays, it's not just enchanting gear, but reforging it and gemming it and making sure that the stats on it weighs up with everything else, that you're not breaking anything by putting it on, that you're not putting yourself below a certain hit level, a certain haste cap is what I was trying to say, and all this other stuff you have to do every time you get a new piece of gear. So with all this removed, you don't have to sweat over all that as much, and they're also reducing the number of pieces of gear that can be enchanted and gemmed. In fact, I wasn't sure about this, but it sounded like about the only way you'll get gems in, what did I say it was called? WoD. About the only way you're going to get gem slots in WoD is if it's a random roll, and that brings us to tertiary stats, which is the other reason they're getting rid of those two, and also they're getting rid of dodge and parries, because they want to bring in more interesting stats, which actually sounds like something else they're taking from Diablo 3, which, again, it's very interesting. We went from, with Diablo, what am I trying to say? Diablo 3 has the WoW tiering system of stats where you just want to get as much of one type of stat as possible. So a bunch of strength if you're a barbarian, just like you'd want a bunch of strength if you're a warrior in World of Warcraft. And after Diablo 3 borrowed that from WoW, now WoW is borrowing back from D3 those random, what are they called, attributes or whatever you get on your gear in Diablo 3 that just add, which actually in what's it called, Reaper Souls, they're going to have, they're going to be dividing those up into main stats and secondary stats. So it's like they're taking those secondary stats from D3, putting it into WoW, so you could get a piece of gear that has movement speed plus on it, or no durability loss on it, and different things like that. And because they're putting all these new things into it, which are randomly generated on the gear when it drops, so that gives you a reason to keep farming stuff over and over again, and not just get your full best in slot set and be done. I mean, you could if you wanted to, but if you really want to be the very best you can be, you need to keep farming that gear till you get that, like the tertiary stat on it, and the gem slot on it, and Warforged. And I don't know if all these things are going to be mutually exclusive, or if you can just have a piece of gear that has all these things stacked on it at once, because that would be a very rare, very powerful item that would actually be difficult to replace in the next tier. But we'll see. And speaking of items and weights and all that stuff, the item crunch is coming in. Just want to throw that in as a side note. I think most people know what that is now. Nothing really to say about that. It's the same game as it is now, just with smaller numbers. They promised that we could still solo old content, but actually there's one thing that I'm curious about. They said that they're taking, like, how things go up from tier to tier in a single expansion, and they're flattening it out, and that's how they're doing the item crunch. Well, what about all the like classic rating guilds, BC rating guilds that still like to go through all those different tiers and pretend like it's still that expansion? If you're at the 70 cap, for example, and you get full Kara, Gruul, Mag gear, and actually, no, because then you'd be able to use that to go into Kel'Thas and Vosh. But let's say you got all the gear from the Eye and from SSC. Would that gear be the same power, the same quality as Kara gear? And so would you be completely unable to ever raid Black Temple again because it just requires a level of gear that you no longer have access to? I mean, I know that higher levels can still go back and solo that stuff, no problem. They said they'd figure that out. I'm just wondering if people at level would still be able to do that. Or would still be able to clear the content if they just wanted to raid in a BC-only guild. I don't know. But, I mean, that'll just be something to think about going forward. I'll look for that. I'm very curious to see how that is actually handled. Anyway, I do keep losing my train of thought here. Okay, I'm trying to remember. Yes, I do think that the removal of hidden expertise is sort of dumbing down the game, but they want to add something in. Like, there's a real reason for it besides just dumbing it down, which is the tertiary stats, as they called them. And now removing dodge and parry is interesting. They are going to put armor into the game because they feel like that active mitigation's worked out well, so not all the tanks will suddenly feel like they're exactly the same. So, I mean, right now we have 2 dodge tanks, so they feel different than the other 3 tanks, but at the same, so whenever they do take out dodge as that type of stat. Now, they said that, like, you can use an ability and it'll increase your chance to dodge and whatnot, but you can't stack dodge and things like that. But they shouldn't all the tanks shouldn't end up feeling the same because active mitigation will create a difference in play style. So, I mean, I guess that's their idea behind that. And to be honest, I mean, there's not that big a difference between dodge and parry. It just seems odd that they would remove both of them and replace it with just straight up armor rather than merging those two into one type of stat. But, I mean, if that's what they're going to do, I'll wait and see how that plays out. Yeah, that'll basically be it, actually. I think those are all the highlights. Those are all the main points. And, yeah. Oh, I did notice, though, that Blizzard did seem to be going out of their way to favor the Alliance this BlizzCon, just to say, we're sorry, we tried to make it balanced, and it always felt like it was favoring Horde, so this time we're just going to overtly praise the Alliance and say good things about them to try and make up for that. So that's interesting, you know. Well, how long's it been? Like 2 years of the Alliance saying Horde favoritism, so Blizzard had to try and make it up to them somehow, I guess. Well, anyway, that's really got to wrap it up, I think. There was a whole lot of information that came out of BlizzCon this year. I'm still going through it all in my head, mulling it over. If I think of anything else in particular, I might just make an episode where I just talk about that. Yeah, all right, that about wraps things up. If you want to get in touch with me, you can do so by leaving a comment below or contacting me on Twitter at Lantis Armstrong. That's LantisArmstrong. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.